my next guest, the president of Arrive Alive, Sharon Inglefield. Thank you so much for coming in. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Rennie. Thank you for having us on.
It is great to have you here. And I ask you in because a lot of folks are beginning to say, well, is the Minister of Works and Transport crazy? I mean, what you're talking about, increasing the penalty. There are many people who are saying increasing that penalty is a good idea. Before I get to that, I want to ask you, because I know that your organization was very instrumental in getting the enforcement of already existing legislation done. Now that it's being enforced, my question to you is, are you seeing proof that this is in fact working? If you can quantify it, it would be good to hear it.
Well, the proof is less families are grieving, Rennie. And as a road safety NGO, our focus is on keeping families together, preserving lives, and ensuring that we have no more fatalities. Our vision and mission is zero fatalities because every life matters. And we've been seeing this steadily decline in serious collisions, less injuries, as well as less fatalities. In 2015 was the lowest number for 15 years. And again, this year to date, we've had 68 deaths versus 76 for the same period last year, and 60 road traffic accidents versus 66 last year. So a steady decline. Less families grieving, 8 less families grieving this year versus last year. And that's really what our focus is on. You know, we are focused on the ball at all times, which is keeping families together and ensuring that they preserve their present lifestyles, whatever their lifestyle is, from being a fisherman to right back to being a CEO of a multinational company.
One of the good things that the finance minister said at one time, he said, sometimes we put penalties, we put a charge on things. We charge people not only for us to get the money, but to change behavior.
Very important to change behavior.
Are you seeing, in addition to the statistics that say, yes, this is the result, are you seeing an attitude change from drivers?
We certainly are. And I mean, we got a lot of opposition when the seatbelt legislation came in. Then there was the breathalyzer. There was even all kind of talk about Arrive Alive was sponsoring the breathalyzer. We were the agent for the breathalyzer units. Of course, a lot of rubbish, but we're accustomed. The venom comes out whenever there's change, especially when the change affects a behavior that's been entrenched for donkey's years. As I keep saying, we've been allowed to be lawless on our nation's roads for a very, very long time. So to enforce that law, to get people to understand that people are dying, this is why the law has to be enforced. And the law has been there forevermore. We're not saying that maybe the speed limit needs to be changed over time, but certainly not initially when we have a maintenance issue with our nation's roads. That we have barriers that need to be fixed. We have white lines, lighting, the whole 9 yards.
I'm glad you went into that, because looking up at what you've been advocating, you being your organization, is the whole question of our roads not being driver friendly.
Exactly. So there's a whole road safety management system, and it goes right back to the auditing of our roads to make sure they're up to that 3-star minimum status to ensure our roads can, in fact, compare to developed countries. We like to compare ourselves to developed countries. Well, our roads need to be compared to developed countries, and therefore they need to be well maintained, well engineered. And then, of course, there's the enforcement. A good example is the fact that we have no offense for pedestrians crossing our highways. So last year we saw as many pedestrians die as we saw drivers. And one of the things that, very soon we're going to have to start lobbying for is somehow to make it obligatory for pedestrians to have their ID cards on them at all times, and to bring in an offense for a pedestrian who continues to cross a 6-lane and a 4-lane highway. Because you're talking about not only being traumatized as the family of the pedestrian, who is now absolutely been negligent from crossing a highway, but also you're talking about the drivers. So I mean, again this morning I'm appealing to pedestrians. We have as many pedestrians dying this year almost as many as we did last year, and that has to stop as well. You know, this look that you get as a driver, you know, bonksman, you know, that all of this has to stop. This irresponsibility, and I mean,
But that irresponsibility calls for legislation that deals with what would be akin to jaywalking.
Well, we have no jaywalking laws.
Well, would it
we
be
have
akin
crosswalks,
to,
and we're meant to cross on these, you know, the overpass, the crossovers, and we still have pedestrians crossing our highways, as we all know. There's no fence. It's difficult to track a pedestrian. If in fact a police officer decides to find them or to hold them up on the side of the road and chastise them for crossing when there's a walkover, not 100 yards down, if you know, so that maybe we need to look at ensuring that all Trinis have Trinbagonians, have ID cards on them at all times, because that's the only way
you can charge them.
Yes, to charge them an offence. It's just something I thought about because I was looking at the stats again and wondering, how do we get sense into the minds of our people who are walking and, you know, walking with children, crossing our roads with children. It's crazy, you know. So I keep saying we have to protect.
You're going to get a lot of pushback from that, but yes, it is.
We are going to get a lot of pushback,
yes.
but the fact is we're getting pushback all around. So you know, my shoulders are getting broader. The weight is heavy, but the shoulders are getting broader. And you know, I just feel that we have to wake up our nation and realize that, you know, life is important. Every single life is important. And we have to think of our families and our children when we're being irresponsible and pushing the boundaries.
It is a very good point you make. Sharon Inglefield is my guest, president of DriveADrive, because when we speak in terms of someone crossing the highway, it is not just their life. It's not just one driver who may hit them either. Is the number of other drivers who were traumatized by this whole disturbance going on in the road, and folks pulling wheel and being totally terrified. I mean, you're really endangering the safety of many people when you take the chance to do that. We are talking about some encouraging numbers you brought in here this morning since the advent of enforcing the existing law. But we are talking about just 6-speed guns. So when we get the full complement on the street, hopefully we will get people. And not only that, the exchequer is actually quite happy.
Yes. Well, the thing is, you know, if you don't break the law, you don't get fined, right? So what's the message there? You know, and therefore we need to change our behavior because the penalty point system is coming, the demerit point system is coming.
Yes.
So if we're
That's
waiting
what the
to change our
talking about,
right,
yes.
so we need to practice these good road habits. We need to practice, you know, making sure that we're driving defensively, that we're not going through the red lights, that we're circumventing the roundabouts correctly.
Let us slow down and detail what this point system is, because a lot of folks need to understand what is involved here. A point system can mean that you are not driving again or for a very long time. Explain the point system so our listeners are really clear on this.
Well, the point system means that if you have a total, say, of 14 points and that that you've gone through a red light, so that could mean 3-4 points that are now black marks against your driver's license because the camera has caught you going through this red light. So you get 4 points. And then, of course, you've been caught speeding. That might be another 4 points because those are very serious offenses.
Moving violations,
right?
yes.
You can kill people by going through a red light. That's how my son died. You can die by speeding. Let's face it. As I keep saying, you know, a crash is much more critical depending on how fast you're going. And I mean, I don't know if we're in denial in Trinidad where that is concerned and Tobago. You know, to say speed doesn't kill, I mean, all right, well then a crash, depending on how fast you go, a crash, it can become critical or it can be less critical to those passengers or drivers. So the points are allocated depending on how serious the infraction is. And therefore they add up, say they add up to 14, you can lose your license.
Repeat offenders will continue to have points accumulate. And
up
so
to
on.
14,
yes.
as an example.
And
I
at
mean,
that point you get suspension or you get a revocation of your license.
Yes, and what we're probably going to push for, and I don't know, again, this is something that we're pushing for, not the minister, so let me make that very clear. A demerit point system for new drivers, in my view, the license should be revoked. Because if as a new driver,
You start that
You
way.
already start with that bad behavior on our nation's roads, and those are the people that are dying, our young men who are pushing the boundaries, so that as a new driver, if you're pushing the boundaries early o'clock, as far as we're concerned, the license should be revoked after you get to the maximum number of penalty points. And therefore, you have to completely reset the exam.
One of the things that's been proffered is this question of, let us stay with the 14-point system that you identify. When someone gets up to an area of about 7, that they should have a remedial program. They should go back and have to take their driver's license all over again. As against just getting the points up and up. There's basically something wrong. Either it is in the brain or it is the training. So is that an option that depending on the amount of points you accumulate and I guess the time frame in which you do it, that you should be setting back to take a driving license all over again?
Well, exactly. As a new driver, for sure, what we're advocating as the nation knows, because we repeat ourselves a lot with these issues, that the driver's examination and the practical as well as theoretical is completely revamped to include hazard perception, that includes speed management, very, very important, includes anger management, it includes all the points that would mitigate driving aggressively, so that it teaches you that, and the driver then buys into road safety as well as the skill of driving well.
Do you play computer games?
Yeah, well, sometimes, not
because
very
sometimes
often.
you're driving on the roads and you get the feeling some drivers are doing that. I was surprised, at least so it was articulated to me, is that there is no law against illegally changing lanes. I mean, you have some people across on the extreme left and they zoom right across to the extreme right and zoom back in the center, and there is no indication, nothing. And I think when you're talking about arriving alive, you have to look at these factors because that is totally crazy. This idea of cutting in and cutting out. I'm hoping that the money they keep raising, they have raised quite a lot so far. I think it's close to $1 million. Keep doing it because that money will be funneled back into getting more police officers on the roads night and day. Night and day. Did I say night and day? Night and day. Because in the nighttime is when you see a lot of the crazies going on. I was told by Superintendent Mathura Singh of the Highway Division that in fact half of the cases they have now are caught in the night. That is encouraging because in the daytime I think folks are slowly beginning to digest the aloe medication. They're beginning to settle down with the bitter taste. Listen, this is what you have to do. But in the nighttime, I get the feeling folks feel that is the time that they can go back to their bad habits.
Well, I will say that in support of the police officers, and I've seen some of the police reports because the police have a meeting with the media every Thursday, I believe it is, and they openly give their statistical information with regards to tickets. Whether it's DUI, whether it's ticketable offences, whether it's speed, etc. And they have ticketed many a driver in the night.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I think the fastest they've caught so far is either 120 or BMW, if I'm not mistaken. So they would actually give you the name and the brand of the car, so that they are out there at night. But let's remember that our officers can't be everywhere at all times, and that's why we're pushing for not only more guns but cameras.
Yes, and
so we need the speed management to include cameras, ticketing by cameras, and we need those cameras up at our intersections as well as on our highways and main roads. That's where right. We have a number of repeated deadly collisions. In addition to a couple of unmarked cars would be a good idea too. Exactly. But police officers uniformed inside of them. I want to go into one of the arguments that came against the idea of 80 kilometers per hour is some folks argue that productivity is affected adversely by this. Any proof of that? Well, I think it's simple math because if you do the distance, what is distance equal? I forgot the equation. It's distance equal. You're looking in the right direction over there, yes. And I think if you take 80 kilometers versus 112 kilometers, it's like 20 minutes, not so? I think so that would be the production that they're talking about, 20 minutes. And I asked you, what's the cost of a life? what's the cost of a serious injury? I mean, when we look at this, our national rugby player who is now a cripple, very, very sad with you know, I mean, I wouldn't even go to it. You know, he would say, and he was a passenger, you know. So, I mean, what's the cost of an injury? What's the cost of a life? 20 minutes is nothing. Plan your day better. Yeah. And hopefully the minister, when we all adjust our behavior and drive defensively and start behaving ourselves a little bit better on the nation's roads, when he's up to mark with regards to maintenance, and we have those cameras out there and guns, maybe he'll feel a little bit happier because his statistics will continue to decline, and he will then hopefully increase the speed on some of our highways.
So you see, when the minister fulfills his bucket list, as well, his checklist,
yes.
But on that list is the question of increasing penalties. I was amazed on the morning show we do here Monday through Friday from 6 until 9 o'clock. I ask our listeners to call in and give recommendations for what the penalty should be in monetary terms for those who exceed 80 kilometers. And every time one of them said $5,000, I asked the question, are you driving? You know, like, but what you think would be sufficiently a deterrent? The increase that the minister's talking about right now, what is it, $1,000? What are we looking at?
I think it's $1,000, and maybe, I mean, I haven't had this discussion with him, but maybe he's looking to decrease it depending on the speed that the driver is going. So if he's going at 140 kilometers, it's maybe doubled or tripled. I'm not sure because, as I say, we haven't had this discussion. I think that he's really talking about the fact that he wants the drivers who continue to push the boundaries, who continue to weave through traffic, as you just said, from a feeder road right across the highway, to wake up and smell the coffee. That you know, the faster you go, the harder you crash.
Yes.
And it's not only about you and your life. It's about others. So I think he's really trying to warn the driving public to really, really take into consideration that he's looking at us, and you know, he's not going to put up with the irresponsible behavior where speed is concerned.
Loss of life is most pronounced on our highways because of the increased speed. However, a lot of injury and property damage is done in our city areas. I mean, when you look at some of the driveways that are on corners, for instance, you're about to do a curve. You know, there's a curve in the road. You're about to take that, and as you start to complete the corner, there's a driveway there with somebody's tail reversing, and so a lot of infrastructural work has to be done.
For sure. And I mean, that's why we talk about the audits, the road safety audits. And I think we really need to spend some money on road safety. We need to have an annual budget so that we can look at the main roads, the way the traffic flow, because the traffic flow has increased substantially in some of our towns and cities, as well as on the main roads. And therefore, we need to look at all of that and take that into consideration. Auditing our roads is really important for the reason you just mentioned, you know, so that we know where we need to spend our funds, where we need to fix, and we take that into consideration together with how many crashes at that particular road, how many crashes at that intersection, you know, and then the engineering remedies, because the vehicles have become stronger, but the driver hasn't evolved, you know, for maybe 50,000 years.
In addition to the infrastructure, cannot deal with the amount of vehicles you have on it. That's a lot of weight on the roads. So
you have to fix the roads because, all right, the vehicles are made stronger, but the roads now need to come up to a particular level.
It would also be of great assistance if we had a number of the utilities who dig up the two-lane road that accommodates two guys parked on either side, and you're supposed to have traffic going both ways on that same road, but then they dig it up and they leave a part that you have to swerve from.
Exactly, and this is why, again, there needs to be, you know, a sharing of information and networking, and again, we're pushing for lead counsel, because you need to have those utility companies, decision makers, with policy in mind, sitting on a lead counsel together with the ministry, the traffic engineers, the police, etc. So there's a sharing of information, there's a trust, there's policy, and therefore they're held accountable if there's a serious accident on that particular road, because they have dug up and haven't fixed back in a timely fashion, or because there's a light pole in the middle of a pavement and, you know, a pedestrian is knocked down, or the vehicle, you know, is there's a serious collision there, because there are guidelines, there is policy, and we need to now hold people accountable. So it really is a multidisciplinary conversation, and there are so many issues, and therefore a lead counsel is really important, so that policies are set, timelines are set, guidelines are set, and there's a lot of trust and sharing before we go down the road of really penalizing just the driver. There are a lot of other issues that we need to take into consideration, and you've mentioned a good one, which is the utility companies.
Sharon Inglefield is my guest, president of DriveADrive. We are talking about not just the 80 kilometers, not just the speed limit, but we are talking about many other associated infractions that occur every day on our road that cause a problem, including the infrastructure we're dealing with. There was a proposal sometime in Barbados, or was it Jamaica? I think it was. I fell in love with it. It said that if a driver, I should pick this up with the Minister of Works, but I want to throw it at you anyway. If a driver crashes into a public bridge or pole or so on, that his insurance should pay the cost of that.
Well, that is in fact, I think, part of our law in Trinidad. That when a driver hits the barriers or the any part of the road safety furniture, the insurance is supposed to pay to have that fixed.
Oh, that is already law here.
I believe so. I mean, I have to check on it, because a number of people have asked me that recently. And I'm surprised that claims are not made against the insurance companies for exactly that, which is why we've been pushing the defensive driving as part of the insurance of a driver and a vehicle. I think it's really important that the insurance companies demand that we all do defensive driving, particularly the new drivers.
What is the position of DriveADrive, the organization, when it comes to a number of people who are receiving their licenses that don't seem at all to have gone through the proper procedure to do it? I've heard folks call for investigation into the whole system of licensing and the inspectors who are passing folks with these things. Is that something your organization now hold information on and takes a position on?
Well, we certainly have people telling us all the time, coming to us and saying to us all the time that they've been asked for a facilitation fee to get their license date brought up, a facilitation fee to get their licenses. We had a Colombian that came to us not too long ago for a DUI. They were sent to us by the magistrate court, hardly could read and write English. And she told us flat out that she paid 4,000 TT dollars to receive her license. So, all of us know that this is happening.
I have heard Trinidadians say that they get down there and they are told you can pay the $4,000 or you can wait for 6 months to get the license.
And to get their vehicles transferred. And I think the minister is aware of this, and he keeps asking for evidence. Well, of course, we can't give the evidence. The person who is being asked is they want to give the evidence. And I throw out there all the time, and again, I get a lot of people upset with us. The venom comes out for sure. If we are paying these fines, it may be costing us time in our businesses, but we're just as bad. We're also part of the problem if we're paying the fines. And I know it's really hard to stand up to a licensing officer or whoever it is that's asking for this fine, but we are part of the problem if we're paying the fine. And therefore, we need to stand up together as whoever it is, whether it's the trucking association, the business, chambers of commerce, and we go to the minister and we say we have proof, and therefore this is the proof. And through the chamber you do this, through your Rotary Club you do this, if you don't want to do it solely as your business. I think the time has come that we have to realize that every time a driver hits our roads that hasn't been well trained via a licensing system,
we're all in danger.
Right, we're all in danger. The theoretical and the practical experience is really important to the safety on our nation's roads.
But the person who's going to pay this money, for the most part, have no intention of going, learning to do the thing properly, so you're hardly going to get them cooperating. Instead, I wonder if you need closer inspection of a correlation between the number of accidents, the period in which they received the license, who the officers were that did this. And if you get that kind of data, it's like a little data mining. You get it together, and then after a while you look for a pattern, and then you move in to fix the problem at the source.
Yes, I mean, and really whatever it takes, because I know the minister spoke about it again last week. The media specifically asked him about it, and he asked for people to come forward. I know at one point one of the ministers was looking at a sting operation within the licensing office, but
he got in a lot of trouble when he said that.
Yeah, exactly. We're appealing to the licensing officers, to whoever it is, really to remember that this is about lives. That this is about safety on our nation's roads, and holding yourselves accountable in the event of a serious collision, because you are part of the problem where safety is concerned.
We seem to be taking this into many directions. No, we are not, because they're all related. When you're looking for a solution, you have to look at all the contributory components, and one of them is going to be congested streets in Port of Spain, and how you in the city, and how you address that. The Prime Minister recently suggested that we start looking at parking meters as a way to ease the congestion. And like I said, it is related, because if you have congested streets, then people are doing all kind of maneuvers and all kind of things and everything possible, and that endangers lives equally, does it not?
Well, I seriously think that they have put in an incentive to build car parks, developers to develop car parks, and there's a tax incentive. And I think a number of developers who own real estate in the city needs to really do this, because I think it would make a big difference. There certainly is a return on investment from developing car parks. The streets are congested, and I think the minute those car parks go up, there should be parking meters, because if you've given a developer the challenge to go out there and develop his real estate, and you're giving him the tax incentive, and we don't put parking meters, or we don't police the parking on our roads, then we're not solving the issue. So we need to encourage the developers to build the car parks and then install the meter. I think that's an excellent idea to improve on the congestion on our roads.
You said that your shoulders are getting broader every moment, so I will ask you specifically, are you in agreement then that we should have parking meters set up in the city?
Only after we develop the real estate for parking garages, because you cannot have one with the other. It's the same thing as the speed limit. Yes, raise the speed limit on certain highways after the roads are properly maintained. We get them up to scratch, and we give our officers more guns, as well as the speed cameras.
Defective vehicles. I see them. I see inspectors looking all the time for vehicles that have not been inspected and so on. But there are a lot of defective vehicles on the road, and they seem to have the stamp, but they are defective. And of course, a defective vehicle, even from a shimmy in the wheel, affects the way you negotiate your curves and your corners and stuff like that. How much attention is being paid to that, I ask?
Well, again, we need the officers and the licensing officers out there looking at that, the garages, and I think that we're now talking about, because as you know, if you haven't gone in there and inspected, it's a summary offence. We're looking to make it a ticketable offence as well, because then immediately you're penalised when the officers stop you on the road, and maybe again the fact that it's right there. It will be quicker focused on by the drivers who are again disrespecting our laws.
What happens in the case where one is found to be driving a vehicle that was not registered or so on? Driver is given a certain amount of time to correct this, or is the vehicle confiscated?
Well, I think we've had an issue for so long of education, awareness that defective vehicles, again, are not safe. And therefore, I don't see the reason to give anybody a chance. The law is there. If you're not obeying the law after all of these years, then to enforce the law is important, and to make sure that people are suffering the offense of a ticket. I don't see the reason to give, again, any warning. It's just like the speed limit. We've been talking about speed guns for how many years, and we know what our speed limits are. They're very simple, 30, 50, 80. And, then there's this hue and cry. No objection before, but objection the minute the speed guns are launched. So the minister, again, is giving us time, because the penalty point system is not yet out. Hopefully it'll be out before the end of the year, the demerit point system. So he's given us time. Let's rush in there and get our cars inspected. particularly if we're driving cars over, I think the period of time isn't 5 years, 3 years. Can't remember now. Brain is getting a little bit old. Let's get in there and get our vehicles inspected as soon as possible and make sure that we're driving safe cars. Check our tires. Check. Make sure that spare is also checked, because that's also a ticketable offence.
Oh, I didn't know that.
If your spare is flat, or if you don't have a spare, that's a ticketable offence as well.
If I don't have a spare or
tire,
a flat?
A spare tire, and if your spare tire isn't up to scratch, that's also a ticketable offence.
The videographer is just as shocked as I am.
Yeah, because if you have a flat tire, you stop to change your tire, and your spare, you have no spare. What happens?
You stay there and you call the record. And you're ready. And you call the record.
I need to drop in some of those little black booklets for you.
Yes, that's going to be useful.
But it's a ticketable offence. And, again, because of it's all part of the safety element, But you want to be able to change our tire fast on your shoulder and get back into your vehicle.
Well, I'm hoping that a lot of these things are in fact implemented, because the conditions on the road is cannot continue the way it has. I think, and I do not drive every day. Okay, disclosure: I do not drive long distance every day. Yeah. But from what I'm hearing, a lot of our callers that I hear seem to be pretty comfortable with the idea that the enforcement of the existing speed limit is in fact working. I like exactly your calculation this morning with the assistance of Diane on the calculation how long it takes for you to make your distance. Well, what you simply do is you move earlier, and when you do that, it actually works out for everybody. The infrastructure, however, is something that will take a bit longer, and I wonder sometimes if we are not at the point where eminent domain must be discussed to widen some of these roads. It's going to be costly, but at the end of the day, some of these roads just cannot accommodate the amount of vehicular traffic. In addition to, you have things like schools just left, right, and center. People are stopping, double parking, triple parking, and the pedestrian version of this is bounce minor, and the driver's version of this is flyover.
Yeah, I know, and it's sad because it just shows it's a reflection on the selfishness, because we even have drivers that stop on pedestrian crossings. They're not letting anybody out. They're not letting the child go into school, but they're stopping on the pedestrian crossing for whatever reason. And I mean, again, that's an offense, and we're looking at the fine, because that is something we need to look at, because I've seen children struggle to cross a road because you have somebody that's parked on a pedestrian crossing, which is crazy, because those pedestrian crossings, particularly around schools, are for the safety of our nation's children.
While we at it, I would really like those cameras that you mentioned. You're talking about in the walkway where folks are parking, but if you look at just that box itself, the intersection box, the grid, and people are clearly going through the light. They know they're not going to make it across to the other side, but they're going to get right inside of there and create gridlock right there. That is a frustration that I would really love to see something done about.
And particularly where that grid exists, which is at that major intersection on Ryson Roads, the cameras are there. And I want to let you all know that we've been into that room at the ministry, that camera room, and the repeat offenders are all recorded as you break that red light, as you break that yellow light, and are stuck on that grid.
So tickets are being issued via the camera?
They're not issuing... Well, I suppose you can call it that they're issuing tickets, Rennie, because the license plate is coming up, the driver is coming up, the type of vehicle is coming up, and the photographs are being taken.
All right, the data mining now,
data mining
but you're going to pay for it very shortly.
Exactly, and they just haven't. And they know who the repeat offenders are. They know who the offenders are. So again, we need to change our behavior before that the merit point system, that red light camera system comes into effect. So the quicker we practice, the better we become. I'm
so glad that you took the time to come out this Sunday morning and spend the time with us, because those are some of the burning questions I wanted to raise, and particularly to dispel the detractors who believe that the speed limit, the enforcement of the speed limit was not a good idea because it's not making a major difference. Your numbers, they are worth repeating, and that our listeners just keep them in mind with this reduction you're talking about.
As I said before, we have 8 less families grieving this year versus last year, 68 deaths in 2016 versus 76 in 2015 year to date, and less road traffic accidents at 60 versus 66 of last year. So 8 less families grieving this year. And I just want to let you know that there is nothing that takes away that grief of a lost one, whether it be child, spouse, or other in this country, because the closure through the courts is 10 years, so that, if for you to decide whether you are going to take that offender to court. I've seen my friends from Mosquito Creek since 2009, 7 years later, and they still have had no closure through the court system. So I'm saying that grief is immeasurable.
Traffic courts is a very good idea. We need to have some of those in the evening. Get some traffic courts inside of this so we can speed up this. I think when people start paying through, when people start losing from their wallets, they pay a lot more attention. I mean, a good example of this is to look at this enforcement that's going on right now. It's raining outside, by the way, on the heels of talking about safety. It's useful to remember when it rains, usually you have grime on the road if the rain is not heavy. You've got grime on the road, which means slippage is possible. In case you get a heavy downpour, don't think you're safe there because you have hydroplaning. So, you just don't win when it's raining if you're not cautious.
Exactly.
Sharon Inglefield, give our listeners access to your site.
ArriveAliveTT.com. You can get us at 675-LIVE, and our email address is contact@ArriveAliveTT.com.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
And thank you, Rennie, for having us on.
You have a wonderful morning.